Hello everyone, welcome to Field Ecology Hike number 3. We've completed our work now at Shale Creek and at Beaver Island State Park, and now we are at the Audubon Pond. Now this is a place where we visited earlier in the year to do some work with management techniques, if I recall correctly. Focused on forest and wetland management. Well, today we're here to do some aquatic ecology work, and before we do, I'm going to go through our sightings from our last visit. So when we were at Beaver Island, this is what we covered on our last trip. I'm beginning here with number 63. We have bufflehead, one of our sea ducks, American robin, common merganser, and red-breasted merganser, also part of the sea duck tribe. Osprey, if you remember in the hawk and eagle family, we saw them on the platform nest. Great blue heron, we enjoyed their rookery. Double-crested cormorant, we saw quite a few of those at the rookery, along with a song sparrow, a black locust tree, box elder, London plane tree, and we saw one flowering plant, the common chickweed. So that's what I have from our sightings from Beaver Island. If I've forgotten any, please forgive me. Add them in on your own if you'd like. But that'll catch you up to date with what we've got thus far so that your journal is in good shape. Good. All right, we're going to begin here with our aquatic ecology work. And I think the first thing I'd like to share with you is the general notion of limnology, because that's what we're doing today. Limnology is essentially the study of freshwater ecosystems. And within that context, we actually move in two directions. We have what are called lotic systems, which are running water systems, and we have lentic systems, which refers to standing water systems. Now, our work today is going to be focused on the lentic systems, but before we delve into those environments, let me take you quickly through the lotic systems. So when we speak of running water systems, essentially we can speak of them in a couple of different ways. The first way is sort of a generic overview, and we use terms like brook, creek, stream, and river. Essentially, this is telling us whether the systems are perennial or whether they are systems that are intermittent. Intermittent meaning they're sometimes dry. Perennial means they're flowing year-round. And that's one way of describing them, and it's based upon the amount of water and the size of the systems, the depth of the systems. But as I said, it's more of a generic view. There is another view we can take to these lotic systems, which I'll share with you in a moment. Okay, another way to look at the types of lotic systems is to speak of them as an order, which is to say we have first order streams or second order streams, etc. And what that means is this: a first order stream lacks tributaries. So it's going to be very small, and it's not fed by other tribs only from water runoff and from the source. And when two first-order streams combine, we get a second-order stream. When two second-order streams combine, then we have a third-order stream. So everything is basically a matter of how many tributaries are flowing into these systems. And generally speaking, when you have a first to third order stream, you're speaking of headwaters, usually intermittent streams and small in comparison to others. On the order of 4 to 6, you have medium-sized streams. And when the order is above 6, we call that a river. So this is just a way to designate these lotic systems. Now, as we move a little further along this trail, I will then focus on our lentic systems. Okay, at this location you might see some geese behind us. So we have some of our waterfowl friends in the neighborhood with us. Here I would like to share with you a brief overview of lentic systems. And generally we speak of 5 that make up these lentic systems. And we usually define them essentially by depth, and we define them by their vegetative cover. So let's go through them. Number 1, the largest of our systems, our lentic systems, is a lake. And essentially a lake by definition is a standing body of water that is too deep for rooted plants to exist from shoreline to shoreline, which basically tells you that sunlight cannot reach the bottom. Now, depending upon water clarity, we can generally look at lakes as having at least 30 feet of water, 30 feet of depth. But that will vary as a result of the clarity. So that's a lake. And from a lake, we have a pond. And a pond is a body of water that is simply shallow enough for rooted plants to extend from shoreline to shoreline. Next, we have what we would call perhaps a marsh. And a marsh is a seasonal body of water characterized by what we call emergent plant growth. That is, plants emerging from the shorelines like cattails, rushes, sedges, arrowheads, individuals like that. So that's how we define a marsh. Okay, seasonal, but characterized by this emergent type of growth. Next we have a swamp. And a swamp is also, at least in our area, a seasonal body of water characterized by woody plant growth, shrubs and trees. That's what sets them apart from other systems. And then finally we have a bog. Bog is a very unusual environment. I'd love to take you to a bog someday. Bogs are characterized essentially by a lack of inflow and outflow. That is essential. So you have a rather stagnant system, which as a result has very low oxygen levels, which as a result has very low bacterial action. So bogs are like pickle barrels. Everything in them gets preserved. Decomposition is extremely slow. And so you have very acidic environments with a system that literally preserves that which falls back or dies in it. That's why you have peat being built up in bogs, and it's that peat that releases these weak acids, and that's why the system is so acidic. These are the places where we find carnivorous plants, and it's where we find a wide range of orchids, and as a result, it's just a very, very unique environment. So these are the 5 lentic systems: lake, pond, marsh, swamp, and bog. A brief overview of each. Okay, folks, when it comes to these lentic systems, and of course what we have here can actually be called either a pond or a lake. You know, the terms are used interchangeably very often. I don't know exactly how deep this environment is, but I could be pretty comfortable calling it a lake, I suppose. Water clarity is a little rough, and I suspect rooted plants cannot grow from shoreline to shoreline here. But in any case, when we're speaking of these lentic systems, how about we focus for a moment on their origins? Where do they come from? Geologically speaking, many of these lentic systems originate from glacial action, glacial erosion and deposition. Some of them also come as a result of glacial chunks being broken off and melting, depressing the land, releasing their sediments. Those are called kettle ponds or kettle lakes, and many in our area are formed in that way as well. We also have blockage in lotic systems like streams and rivers, where there's blockage and sedimentation. You know, this can block off areas and create these other types of lentic systems. You also have everything from shifts in the Earth's crust to extinct volcanoes producing lentic systems like the one we've described. So those are geologic processes which can create systems like this. And of course we also have biological origins with many of them as well. And there are basically 2 creatures I know of that create ponds and lakes and marshes potentially, and the others. And that would be Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and Mr. and Mrs. Human. And you know, as a result of that type of biological activity, we find ourselves looking at aquatic environments like these as well. Okay, we just wanted to make a quick stop here and show you this leaf and show you these trees in here. And these are individuals that we've actually seen before on our travels. And the leaf has a rather triangular look to it, is toothed along the margins. The bark is very rough and deeply fissured. And you might recognize this as the eastern cottonwood. And you might remember that this is a member of the willow family, Salicaceae. It is a member of the genus Populus. And by the shape of the leaf, which is triangular, Populus deltoides. And here are some nice cottonwoods along the edge, living where they like to live, where it's nice and wet. Okay, right now we're just pointing to some houses in the neighborhood, and Bay is trying to find the cardinal that is singing to us. Not sure if you can you see him?
Yeah, I can see him.
Okay.
He's in this tree right here.
Okay.
And let me see if I can get my finger in the shot.
Okay.
Right around here.
All right, good, good. And what I heard was the and we're getting another vocalization from that one in the tree. We're looking at a pine tree, and he's in the pine tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got a nice cardinal in the neighborhood. All right, very good. Okay, folks, as Bay is giving you a look at this part of the lake, I think I'd like to take you through various types of zones in an environment like this. I think that might be helpful for us to do. The first thing I think I'd like to do is look at sort of the structure of a system like this in terms of zonation. And I'm going to begin in this way. Along the edges, we have what's called the littoral zone. Littoral, the littoral zone. And this is the shallow water environments here where sunlight reaches the bottom. And this is an area where there are lots of emergent plants and as a result, lots of life. That's the littoral zone. As we move further out into the open water environment, we have what's called the limnetic zone. And this speaks of the open water as far as light penetrates. And here, of course, we have various types of floating vegetation very often, and you have invertebrates on that vegetation, and you have fish, and you have also an active area. The third zonation would be the bottom zone, and that's what we call the benthic zone. And the benthic zone is where we have essentially decomposition occurring. We have both aerobic and anaerobic life at the bottoms of these environments. And so you have a considerable amount of activity, but the activity is focused essentially upon decomposition in many cases and recycling in that regard. So looking at the overall structure, if you will, of a system relative to zonations, you have the littoral zone and the limnetic zone, and then you have the benthic zone. And another way that I could look at zonations, since we've just been mentioning some plants, would be plant zonations. And we have 3 of those as well. Those along the edge, a term that I've already shared with you, are the emergent plants. And these are plants that have their stems in the water and their roots in the water and their leaves and reproductive structures above the water, like cattails, for instance. And that's the emergent plant zone. Then we also have what's called the floating plant zone. And the floating plant zone has plants either rooted or floating. So those that are floating would be plants like duckweed on the surface, with little roots hanging down from the surface. And then we have rooted plants like water lilies and the water lily family, for instance, and many others that are actually rooted, but their leaves, heavily waxed, are on the surface of the water. You know, as we're talking, I'm going to turn Bay around because there's a beautiful shot of a vulture moving away from us. Were you able to get him?
A little bit, yeah.
All right, good. Come on back to the water now. So a nice vulture paid us a visit. Didn't want to miss him. And now back to the water and the plant zonations. The third zonation is what we call the submerged plant zonation. And these usually include plants we call water weeds and pond weeds. And their leaves are under the surface, although they do flower above the surface. And they lack xylem in their stems. So they're free floating, they lack structure, and they actually absorb what they need from the water directly from their leaves. So when we look at plant zonations, then we have the emergent plants, we have the floating plant zone, and we have the submerged plant zone. So these are two different ways of looking at zonations in a lentic system like this, looking at structure in the general